defend WikiLeaks. In some ways, the WikiLeaks response, I mean, we know they lie to us, yeah? I mean, how many people here really thought there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? How many people really think the war in Afghanistan is about freedom for women? They systematically lie to us. They lie all the time to defend what they really do. What they can't tolerate, though, is when those lies actually become public, when people begin to see the scale of the lies that are told. And I think we need to ask ourselves, even with what we know over the last little bit from WikiLeaks, if this is coming from such a low level of security, what are the lies, what are the deals, what are the scandals that actually operate at the highest level of the system? You know, if we could see some of that. Perhaps 2 or 3 million had access to these particular diplomatic cables, and we're very grateful to Bradley Manning for releasing them. But the scale of the lies, you know, 1 level up, 2 levels up, you know, must be so much more appalling that I think it behoves us to actually, you know, sort of respond to what we do know about this. I wanted to raise a little bit about what it's got to do with refugees. I'm sorry, one thing I wanted to say first is about the media. Because I think it's actually quite interesting that on the one hand the media, the New York Times, you know, the Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald has been willing to trawl through, you know, the cables, and actually I think it's a little unfortunate it's been up to various journalists to work out what is going to be released. And we're getting a somewhat filtered version, you know, of the cables through those journalists that are doing that particular job. But I think we need to, and some of them, including the leaders of most of the newspapers in Australia, have been quick to actually condemn Gillard, and rightly condemn Gillard, for, you know, what she's been saying about Assange, for the declarations that it's illegal, and if it's not illegal, you know, that it should be. But I think we do have to ask the question of those proprietors, is that where were they? Where were they in the war in Iraq? Where were they in the war in Afghanistan? Where were they in the secrets about, you know, deaths in custody or about refugees? Where was the media when we needed them, when we needed to expose what's been going on? That's why it's not just WikiLeaks and it's not just the media. It is going to be up to us in the final analysis. I want to say a little bit about why it matters to refugees, what WikiLeaks has got to do with refugees. And Ewan mentioned one of the cables which has come out, and it's probably one of the only things that I agree with any Liberal Party member about, is that the more votes the better. They didn't mean it in those terms, but I certainly mean it. The more votes that come to Australia, the more welcome the possibilities of getting asylum seekers are welcome, the more in which what is happening in Afghanistan, Iraq and Sri Lanka is exposed by the fact that people come here seeking asylum, then the better it is to actually build a campaign which can have a genuinely humanitarian refugee policy in this country. But it exposes itself in all kinds of ways. For example, what Gary mentioned, the disgraceful line of people inside the Labor Party who are considered to be protected sources for the United States. What he didn't mention was Stephen Smith, a similar protected source. Now, Stephen Smith used to be our foreign minister, and in the wake of the so-called end of the civil war in Sri Lanka, Stephen Smith and the arrival of many Tamil asylum seekers as a consequence of the end of that civil war, Stephen Smith made it a point to go to Sri Lanka to shake hands with the butcher of Colombo, Rajapaksa. Prime Minister now, Prime Minister as a consequence of a rigged election, Prime Minister as a consequence of a bloody war waged against Tamils and repression which is still being inflicted on Tamils, which is still being inflicted on Sinhalese, on anybody who dares speaks out about the human rights abuses in Sri Lanka. But Stephen Smith shook the hand of President Rajapaksa, offered them more money from the Australian government, offered them money to make sure that the Sri Lankan army was going to be equipped with even more firepower and capacity to make sure that refugees, Tamils, did not get off the beaches, you know, of Sri Lanka. And just shortly after Stephen Smith was there were Sri Lankan refugees shot on the beaches attempting to get to asylum boats to get, we can only presume, to Australia. But some of the WikiLeaks have come out as very clear. I mean, the knowledge about the scale of what Rajapaksa done is reasonably well known, although you wouldn't know it if you looked at the Australian media. I think I have counted perhaps 2 or 3 articles since the end of that civil war which doesn't have anything to say about the scale of the repression in Sri Lanka, about the genuine struggle of the Tamils for self-determination in Sri Lanka and for their human rights. But some of those WikiLeaks have exposed the fact that the people who sit in the Pentagon and the US State Department consider Rajapaksa guilty of war crimes. And when Rajapaksa showed up to do a similar stunt as he did with Stephen Smith in Britain only a week or so ago, that WikiLeaks was exposed. It was public through The Guardian, and thousands of Tamils turned out onto the streets of London to make sure that Rajapaksa was not welcome in Downing Street. That's why they don't want WikiLeaks. That's what they're afraid of, is that when people see that truth, they respond in a way which exposes the dirty business that whether it's Australia or the British government is willing to do to welcome war criminals into their Parliament House or into the government houses. But I wanted to say something also about Australia, because there's one little example I think which touches my heart, which is a very recent phenomenon. Less than 3 months ago, Joseph Raluni, a Fijian man who was threatened with deportation back to Fiji, jumped off the roof of a building in Villawood and died. Suicide. Now, that's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy in anyone's description. But the response we knew outside from people inside, we knew within minutes actually that Joseph Raluni was dead. We knew immediately that there had been a suicide in Villawood. But the Immigration Department continued to deny it. Even when detainees contacted the media, even when they contacted us and we contacted the media contacted the Immigration Department, they refused to make any kind of comment about that. The people inside were devastated by that, were disgusted that there should be such an attempt to keep that information secret. The Immigration Department then proceeded to run blue plastic all around the section of course stage 2 inside Villawood, so that people couldn't see in to what was happening where Joseph had died, so the media couldn't take any footage of what was happening inside. And to their absolute credit, people may remember this, that there were 11 people climbed on the roof in stage 3. They climbed on the roof at stage 3, not because of anything to do with their claim, but because they wanted to make sure that Australia and the world knew the truth about what was happening inside the detention centres. And I think it spoke a lot, I think, that people themselves in such desperate circumstances, such vulnerable circumstances, were willing to take that kind of action so the truth was known about what was happening inside Villawood. And still, the department denies that. When the British man suicided only two weeks ago, again, we knew that, but midnight, shortly after midnight, it took the department 4 hours, more than 4 hours, to acknowledge that there had been another death inside Villawood. It's the kind of way in which the whole system operates, from the level of the diplomatic cables between Australia, the United States and Sri Lanka, right down to the way it actually operates in the very immediate circumstances of today. Now, other people have said this isn't just about our right to know. Of course we have a right to know, and of course we should know. But I think it says something more than that. Now that we understand, and now some of that information has come out which has exposed just how much their system operates on lies, operates on deception, relies on those lies in order to keep themselves in power, we can understand that their democracy is a veneer. Their democracy is a facade. Their democracy is something they hand out to us once every 3 years, put a little tick on a bit of paper, while business as usual, while the war machine, while the torture machines continue business as usual behind the scenes. Well, I think we have to say very loud and clear, enough is enough and no more. If WikiLeaks has told us something, it's about the system and why that system has to be shut down. Now, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power, but it's only power when we act on it. That knowledge can become power when we turn it against them, when it becomes the motivation for action. When that can be about the war in Afghanistan, it can be about refugees, it can be about all kinds of things. But we have to turn that knowledge into the kind of will to act, which means that they cannot operate as business as usual. And we see what they're doing now in the wake of the tragedy on Christmas Island. They want to point the finger at the people smugglers, point the finger at the bad weather. They'll point the finger anywhere but where it needs to be pointed, and that is at the feet of the Australian government, whose policies are directly responsible for that disaster at Christmas Island and the ongoing tragedy that's happening inside the detention centres. Now we need to make sure that the lies and the deceptions simply don't go unanswered. And I want to then finish up with one final thing, because don't think that it's simply an area that operates at the level of diplomatic cable. Now, people may have seen again in the news that there are 10 people from the Oceanic Viking, 10 Tamils being brought from the Oceanic Viking to Australia. There are another 7 being left behind in Romania because they have adverse security clearances. There are already 7 people from the Oceanic Viking who are in indefinite detention because of having adverse security clearances. The last week and a bit, there are 3 more Tamils having been in detention 18 months and thinking they're on a so-called approval pathway, had adverse security findings, and they now face indefinite detention inside the detention centres. There is the Rohingya man. Do people know the Rohingyas? A small minority in Burma, known only for the abuse of their human rights internationally, whether it's in Burma or whether it's in Bangladesh. One of those Rohingya men, again, after 16 months in detention, has been given an adverse security clearance. Now, under Australian law, and we've attempted to go to federal courts and to high courts and all the rest of it, under Australian law, they are not entitled to know why they got that adverse security clearance. They are not entitled to challenge the information that ASIO systematically uses to make those adverse security clearances. And that, I think, is the kind of abuse which operates at a day-to-day level. If there is a right to know, if there's a right to know about those scandals, there's a right to know about how ASIO operates inside the detention centres, why people have been given adverse security findings, why people are spending 16, 18 months in detention before they get those kinds of answers. So I think we want to go away from here. We'll take to the streets here now, and that's great, but we need to go away here, as I said before, determined to act. If the Tamils inside the detention centres can get on the roof of those buildings and wave placards to the world to expose what is going on, it is up to us metaphorically to do exactly the same thing. We have to find those buildings to stand on. We have to find those placards to wave. We know they tell lies to us. We need to do something to bring those lies down and to bring the system of lies down on top of their heads.
Thank you very much, Ian. Ian was our last speaker of the day, and as Ian said, we are going to take it to the streets now for those whose feet aren't too hot to walk. We'll just form out on the street over there. There's a couple of people with megaphones going to make a bit of noise. So let's all kick it off as we head out onto the streets. We demand free speech. Hands off WikiLeaks. We demand